Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fertility Forum 2021. As you will all understand, we've had a hiatus in running this event. We'd normally run it face-to-face at a London venue, but for all the reasons that you can understand, we're continuing to stay online with the Fertility Forum this year. We have an audience from around the globe, from both the UK and as far as Barbados and across Europe attending today's event. It's a real mixture of people who run and own and operate clinics, who run clinics, clinicians, embryologists, and investors in the sector who are interested in what our panelists have to say today. I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Houlihan Lokey and Pharmaciage, who've made this event possible today, and you will be hearing from contributors from those two businesses in the sessions later on. If you want to share anything you pick up from the event today, please use the hashtag Fertility Forum. If you'd like to contribute a question, please use the Q&A facility within the Zoom to submit a question, and you can of course rate other people's questions. So if we have questions coming in from the audience during the panel sessions today, I will select those as they come in. If you'd like to actually address the audience, then just use put your hand up in Zoom, and if there's an appropriate time and we have a space for it, we will ask you, if you're happy to do that, to actually speak or address your question to the panel. So firstly, just let me give you some very brief background before we go to our first panel. And I'd like to just share with you the highlights of the latest kind of May 2021 HFEA data. We're very fortunate in the UK in having the HFEA. It's fairly unique around the globe in terms of having a body within a country that is completely dedicated to monitoring and assessing activity within this sector. I just want to share the kind of some of the top line data from their report back in May 2021, which you haven't read it, definitely download it and read it. I think one thing we should do is congratulate the industry over the many years it's operated in its success, and the number of infertile couples that are now able to have children in this country across a broad range of age groups. As we see there, it's been massively successful, and the success rates have improved year on year. Next slide, please, Jade. The makeup of the cycles that are undertaken, that's kind of mix has changed over time, and we see that the balance of fresh v frozen has now changed over time, and 41% of cycles are being delivered from frozen embryos. One thing we'll be talking to our panel about and asking their view on is where they see or whether they see growth in this sector. We've seen growth in IVF cycles up to about 2017, and then it's kind of become a static and leveled off. Next slide, please, Jade. In terms of how do we create children, the mix of that has changed over time, and we see now that the use of patient eggs and donor sperm is now the predominant form of IVF cycle. And the last slide from that set, please, Jade. And of course, the breakdown of IVF cycles by age is interesting. The average age of a woman undergoing IVF is now 35, 36 years old. And increasingly, as women are put back later in their life having children, we're seeing the need for IVF for those older age groups becoming far more important. Thank you, Jade. If you could move to the panel screen. So today's event, we've split it into 4 panel sessions. We're looking at the impact of COVID on fertility treatment, what our panelists might see as the future trends, a session later on about patient choice and patient expectations, and our final session today, one of the sectors that's probably been hardest hit by COVID, some international speakers from clinics around the globe who are involved in cross-border reproductive care or fertility travel. But in our first session this morning, we have 4 excellent contributors. What I'm going to ask them to do, the way we're going to run this session, is I'm just going to give them 5 minutes each to start off with. And I've asked each of them to share something with us that they've done differently, or how COVID and the pandemic affected them personally. Then to give their brief kind of background, who they are, where they come from, and then to kind of highlight one key point about COVID-19 and fertility treatment. So first up, we're going to run them 5 minutes each across the screen, and then we'll move to the discussion. Katya Zubreva from LEK Consulting. Katya, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Keith. Hi, everyone. As Keith says, I'm a partner at LEK Consulting in the healthcare services part of LEK, and I spend a lot of my time in fertility, so I'm very, very happy to be part of this today. In terms of the how COVID impacted me in particular, I think most of it has been, me working from a kids' playroom and trying to juggle work from home and children. Really, that has been the main pain point, but that has now reversed. So I'm trying to find a good balance in terms of working from home or working from the office, but nothing major in my life changed as a result of this, really, outside of that. In terms of COVID impact on the IVF as an industry, I think I'm quite lucky to know a fair few of the providers in Europe and broader as well. So hopefully I have a decent kind of cross-country, cross-provider view here, which will be helpful. And I think the way we tend to think about it, and the way I would suggest you think about it, is separating slightly domestic cycles and foreign cycles, right? And for domestic cycles, fertility is ridiculously resilient as an industry, generally speaking. So prior recessions where we have data for that, it traded through without batting an eye, really. People do want to access these treatments, and it's a time-sensitive matter, so you can't really delay it very much. So in the domestic cycles, the only thing that stopped people from engaging with fertility providers would be the fact that the clinics were closed or semi-closed. It depends on the geography, really. In some places, they were open for cycles that were already in progress, but you couldn't start new ones and things like that. But there was a period of a couple of months, typically in 2020, sort of April, May, June time, where the clinics couldn't do as many cycles as they would like to because of the restrictions and closures. But those cycles came back as soon as they were allowed to. So over the summer and autumn 2020, I'll be surprised if I hear from someone else something to kind of contravene that. But it seems like people came back very quickly, and clinics were able to absorb those additional cycles as well, and kind of process them through the rest of 2020. So 2020 as a calendar year, from what I hear, pretty much across countries for domestic patients, was a pretty normal year in terms of volume. So it grew slightly on 2019, as you would expect. Nothing too surprising in mix, and kind of back to normality from there on. So 2021 is again showing growth on 2020, as you would expect it to. Foreign patients are slightly more complicated, and I think there are 2 dimensions there. One is the distance you're traveling and how you're traveling it, and the other one is the reason for traveling. So if you were traveling from, I don't know, France to Spain, and you had to fly, some of that volume hasn't come back yet because there is still travel restrictions. Or if you're flying out to the UK without ridiculous, super complicated entry, re-entry kind of rules, right, where you have to quarantine for 10 days after you come back and things like that, the travel volumes have been impacted. If you were driving from Germany to Czech Republic, you could come back a lot faster. So in order to unpick kind of the impact of foreign travel restrictions, you have to look at it on a country by country basis. And another dimension is the reason for traveling. And we know that people overwhelmingly travel for regulatory arbitrage between countries. So maybe you are not allowed to access a certain type of treatment in your country. Single mothers, same-sex couples, donor treatments. Maybe you want an anonymous donor rather than a non-anonymous one, and you travel for those reasons. And some of them are kind of navigable and others are not, right? In a situation where you're not allowed to travel and you have to stay locally. So if you wanted ideally to have an anonymous donor, you might compromise and go for an anonymous donor and have a cycle in your own country. But if you are a single parent or a same-sex couple that are not allowed to have a treatment in your own home country, then you would still have to wait until travel reopens and then go to Czech Republic or Spain or Denmark or wherever it was you were going to. So that's been a little bit more complicated, I think. And of course, if people ever travel for reasons of money, which is a smaller proportion of people, but it still exists, then again, they might have decided to pay a little bit more and stay locally rather than travel abroad. And I think the final, relatively minor trend, and really depends on the provider, but some of the providers who span multiple countries have started doing cleverer things about transferring donor materials across countries. And you always have to comply with the receiving country's regulations when you do that. But in some situations, you were able to send the donor egg over from, Czech Republic to the UK, let's say. It would still have to be non-anonymous to comply with the UK rules. But there's been a little bit more of that donor material transfer than there has been historically, where it used to be easier for the patient to fly than to transfer the donor material and kind of prove that you're compliant with regulation. But I think in kind of overwhelming summary is that the industry has held up really well. There are still some ongoing travel issues with the foreign cycles, but for the most part, it has held up really well. It's trading well, and it's kind of looking at 2022 in a very optimistic way from what I hear.
Thanks, Katja. Some positives there. Let's move on to Professor Ying Chong, co-founder and medical director of Complete Fertility. Ying Chong, what changed in your life during COVID?
Hi, thank you, Keith. So the first slide, as you can see here. A
flower grower.
Yeah, they say gardening, obviously maintains sanity. So I thought I would attempt that, and I did plant dahlia from seeds, which I never thought in a million years I would have succeeded. And at some point, May, June, July, when the seedlings look so weak, I thought this is hopeless. And in September, which is late in the year, you can see that is one of the flowers that my dahlia seeds has produced, and it's still producing flowers. So, I reflected quite a bit on this, and actually many similarities to experiences in IVF, which many of my patients have, where, there is the resilience, there's the determination, there is the patience, and then there you are, the flowers. Next slide, please. And as Keith has introduced, I'm Professor Ying Chong. I am a medical director of Complete Fertility, part of Virtus Health Fertility Group, which is an international group. And we are based in Southampton, but we also have branches in Portsmouth, Chichester, Bournemouth. So this is our center. You can see some photos there. Next slide, please. My other hat, of course, is my work in the university, and you can see there me working with a fellow engineer, professor, colleague of mine, and my interest really is in investigating the womb environment and how do we detect some of these really important changes that can occur in diseases that contribute to infertility. And that I collaborate across the board into mathematics, engineers, physics, and of course the digital health area. So next slide, please. And one of the biggest impact I feel that I've experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, when it first started, was our work around understanding what the emotional signature of our patients were who were undergoing IVF. And this was right from when we had to shut down, throughout the shutdown, post-shutdown, and thereafter. And we have been looking at an app which all our patients use for free, called Medemo, for many years now. And what it does is it tracks emotional signature of the patient, because they are able to put their how they feel in it. This is psychologically evidence-based, so it's a really well-researched area, and it divides the emotional signature into three aspects: the threat, which is, as you can see there, worry, tense, nervous, anxious; the harm component, which is disappointment, sad, discouraged; and the challenge component, which where they feel positive, very confident, and encouraged. Next slide, please. And interestingly, one of my MD students were working with me. We looked back at the data, and you can see here, just to give you a little snippet of the time around where the lockdown happened. And you can see there is a dip in the challenge, which is where patients feel confident and positive, around the sort of April, March. And then, of course, a big spike in the feeling of stress, the threat, and harm component. And then can you press the button so that the next, yeah. And it is interesting if you look at the data around, the ONS data around the COVID data on deaths and so on, you can see that the similarities with emotion tracking on the death register there. That's just one of the many data that we correlated with. So why do we do this? Well, because it's really important to understand what the psychological burden is to our patients. And if we understand that, and that, exactly how they're feeling, we are able, therefore, to support them more, and we will be able to triage as to how we can continue to support them. Because one of the big issues with IVF is actually dropout. A significant number of patients drop out, even in countries where IVF is funded totally. So I'll leave you with that slide. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Ying. We'll come back to some of those themes in the discussion. Next up, Andrew from our sponsor. Andrew, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Keith. So Andrew Murline, I'm a director at Houlihan Lokey, focused on healthcare investment banking. I've been focused on advisory for the last 15 years across M&A and capital markets, spanning all healthcare verticals, with a very keen interest in fertility. On a personal level, during COVID, I had a career change. My boss and I co-founded the healthcare team at Houlihan Lokey. We are now a 10-person strong team since founding in April, and we've teamed up with 60 colleagues around the world. So from a challenge COVID perspective, never met any of my new colleagues prior to joining the desk post lockdown, but very pleased to be back in the office and able to travel again internationally. But I was put to shame by my wife, who gave birth to our third child during lockdown, and since went back to work. So it's safe to say it's a very busy time in the Murline household. Just very briefly on Houlihan. So we're a global investment bank focused on 3 divisions: corporate finance, where I sit, financial restructuring, and valuation. Within corporate finance, we're the #1 global mid-market focused independent advisor, and our focus and approach is really leading with sector and domain expertise, advising both companies and investors. The last point I'll make is just in terms of M&A activity, and what's happened during and post-COVID. Well, as a backdrop, I think as Katia mentioned, it's a highly attractive sector within healthcare services that draws significant interest from both growth investors as well as those focused on buy and build. It's highly fragmented, but is well on the way of consolidation. That's both within country and cross-border. I like to think of the industry in its second phase of consolidation. So there's a large critical mass now of providers that have transitioned from founder-owned and managed to institutionalized businesses. And that comes with opportunities and challenges, but we're seeing a number of these large groups, both within country and cross-border, that are really starting to benefit from that critical mass and scale and best practice and synergy. In the main, during COVID, we saw a significant decline in activity, principally on the sizable end of the spectrum. We did see smaller opportunistic deals get done, or businesses that were challenged come to market. However, given the underlying resilience and the positive post-lockdown performance, there's a significant wave of M&A currently in the market or coming over the next 24 months. So I expect a lot of opportunity for potential clinics to have a change in control or seek funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll come back to the investment aspects of this sector later on. Inga, welcome from, I hope it's sunny Madrid. And it's relatively sunny here. Not too bad here at the moment, but I'm sure it's far more pleasant where you are. Welcome, Inga.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, it's actually raining right now, but normally it's nice and sunny weather, as you say. Yeah. My name is Inga Kormelink. I'm the CEO of Clínica Tambra in Madrid. Something about myself, I'm Dutch born. I've been working and living in 5 different countries. My background is actually in economics, with a few masters in finance, international management, marketing and strategies. So I've been working for a few multinationals when over a decade ago, I was asked to help to start a fertility clinic in beautiful sunny Alicante. From scratch. I don't believe actually in destiny, but this time, I mean, I've been an IVF patient myself. When I was a little girl, my appendix exploded. So actually I knew already from a very young age that I was going to need a fertility treatment in order to create a family. And also I learned from a very young age that I had to think in solutions rather than in problems. We're now happy with a great family of 3 children. I'm of course very grateful. Most of the time I have teenagers, so but yeah, everything worked out very well. So 3 years ago, I was headhunted to manage a clinic in Madrid, Tambra, and a managed clinic. Had great values, great laboratory, great medical team, but it was really needed to be restructured. Had no patients, and we all know if you have great values but you don't communicate it, it's like a value not perceived is value not communicated is value not perceived. So I restarted the clinic and back to growth. Even in COVID time, and now I think we can say that we're one of in Spain leading fertility clinics. With regard to the question, what has been the biggest impact on a business perspective, I can say that the thing that I learned, emphasize even more, is that you need to take in times of crisis, you need to take decisions very quickly. There's no time to brainstorm. So you have a problem, you find a solution, and you communicate the next steps. So that's what we did with the team. So strategy, focus, and alignment of the team. That's fundamental to help to help your team to pass this crisis. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, so how COVID has impacted fertility treatment. As we said before, it has affected lives, businesses, and mindset in a way that nobody could have ever foreseen. It was incredible in Spain. I think we got hit the hardest in the beginning. For instance, I couldn't sit at home. I had to go to the clinic. And when I was driving around, I had a police car next to me, military trucks. When you left your house, you had to say where you were going. So it was like sort of war situations. So it was very, very complicated. It was totally unexpected. And actually, nobody was prepared for it. What I found very confusing was all the headlines. Nobody knew exactly how you get infected, what to do. So there was a lot of uncertainty and fear. And that's why communication was so important. So if we go to the next slide, please, Jade, yeah. So the main impacts, so shockwaves in the fertility sector. So we had to follow recommendations of the health institutions. In our case, on the 13th of March, there was a national lockdown. So you're only good, like myself, you're only good with could go to your work with a special letter. We had to treat, or we were still treating the patients till the 31st of March. Because many people were still in treatment, and then we had to close the clinic. There was actually a very emotional moment on the moment that we had to close the clinic. We have several ventilators, and we decided, as we're not going to use the ventilators in operation theaters, to donate them to the hospitals. And yeah, it was very emotional, as I said before. I think we called the hospital in less than 5 minutes. They were already at our clinic to take them to the hospital, and hopefully we have saved somebody's brother, sister, father, or grandfather. So we closed the clinic. I decided to work with key people, 12 people, and the other people were on, the rest of the team was on furlough. That was a very difficult situation because we worked actually as a team around the clock from 8 o'clock in the morning. We always had calls and to decide what we're going to do. But the people who were at home, they felt sort of helpless because they couldn't help us. So the communication at that time was actually key. So it means that communication towards your patients to manage their fears, communication towards the team to keep one team, but also to, we spoke this before about investors, also communication to the investors. So totally different strategies and totally different communication messages. For instance, at the clinic, I had like big white papers about how to manage COVID and what we should communicate and which message we would like to transmit to our stakeholders. In the beginning, patient feelings in the beginning, of course, as a clinic, you want to attract patients, but this time it was absolutely not appropriate. So we started to communicate about what was COVID, how you could get infected, what impact it had on your possible future fertility treatment, and how to handle it. And then we saw by the time that COVID became less and more under control, that we could change the communication strategy more like, okay, we close now, and you know how we're going to work on the day that we open again, and that is safe again to travel to come to the clinic, and that we were COVID-free. So there was a reorientation of the team to attend to new patient needs, and we started a communication strategy with lots of webinars, Q&A. We created facts in every language. We work with 6 different languages, and weekly newsletters were sent out. And that really helped. We had lots of questions, lots of emails. People were very happy and pleased that we were doing this. Because not all the clinics, actually the vast majority of the clinics were not investing in any communication strategy at all. They just closed, but we kept working. And that's also when we opened again, that patient from the very first day came back to us. Mainly national patients, as Katja said before, some countries still have mobility restrictions, so it's difficult to travel. Some patients could travel with a letter, special letter to us, but it was mainly mainly national patients. So we started organization online patient meetings to reach out to our patients and to communicate what could be the possible next steps to undergo fertility treatment, because it's true, people they really wanted to continue with their fertility treatment, and there was no fear anymore. What we also did was actually from a marketing department, observation of weekly travel restrictions and reassurance it's safe to travel. And that was actually very, very positive for patients, that there was so much communication on what steps they should follow in order to come to the clinic and in order to fulfill the dream of having a healthy baby. So I can say that we came out stronger, enhanced level of our care, support. We surpassed what was offered pre-pandemic. We learned a lot. We learned to work how to work online, of course, instead of the Skype, which is really very outdated. We learned to work with Zoom and with the Google Meets. And also as a team, we became much stronger. I mean, I always say the better the team, the better the results. But in our case, it's really true. You know, we became much stronger as a team, and we really celebrated when we were all back together. That we survived it and we became much stronger. Lead by example, because still now it's 1.5 years later, and we still see people that are afraid to travel. So what we do is that. Of course, we have all the protocols, there's the free testing, but also we travel to the countries. We travel to London, we have been in Germany or the Netherlands, where I'm from, to show that it's safe to travel, but also that we lead by example and we go there to see our patients, our potential patients, and explain them and answer their questions on how they could undergo a treatment in Spain. This is the part of my presentation.
Thank you, Inge. If we could bring the panelists back together now, and we'll kind of join the discussion. Just one question for you, Inge, just in terms of the overall business. Are you back to the kind of level of activity that you were pre-COVID, or is that still some time away?
No, it's in contrary. Actually, we're growing at a fast pace. If we can speak in numbers, we have over 30% growth compared to the year before. And that's not only national patients, but also international patients. So it does seem that people that are really, I think the values of people have changed. So family values are very, very important. So I actually see that more and more people are undergoing fertility treatment. So definitely is growing. That's in our case. I can't speak for other clinics, but in our case, it's absolutely growing. Yeah.
Right. Katja, you're a numbers person. I know you gather all the data. We've got a lot of investors out there thinking, should we invest in this sector? We invest in growing markets. Where's the IVF market going over the next few years, do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's been a low single-digit volume growth for a fair few years now, I think. Very much depends on the country, right? So if you look at the US, US is a little bit behind in terms of penetration, and therefore growth is faster there. And I'm sure there are some other European countries which are also still in kind of catch-up mode. But if you look at the more mature countries, Spain or the UK, the market overall, I think, is sort of in the 3 to 4% volume growth type range, plus some interesting mix effects with the shift to frozen cycles that you mentioned, also with penetration of genetic testing, also with us being able to handle more complex patients, older patients, 3rd, 4th, 5th cycles, etc., which require more care, more drugs, etc., so become a little bit more expensive, and somewhat offset by penetration of social freezing, where the cycle itself is less expensive, right? So actually, that's the bit which you didn't have from your HFA numbers. That's the bit which creates the overall market growth currently in the UK. So it's not heroic growth rates, but good providers definitely can outperform that, I think. So I'm not at all surprised that, Inge, you're saying that you're growing faster, and some others are outperforming as well. And also lots and lots of good opportunities in further consolidation of the volumes, whether it's roll-up opportunities that Andrew mentioned, or just taking share and creating bigger clinics, which are real centers of excellence in fertility treatment, which would grow faster than the market overall. So there are some interesting dynamics within the low stable growth rate. But I think, if in healthcare services, so in healthcare provision, there are a fair few segments who would be more than happy to have a 3 to 4% growth rate that is very recession proof and kind of has no signs of slowing down in the foreseeable, right? So it's not a low growth rate, I don't think. It's just a very reliable one, with some interesting other things to play with mix effects, patient types, foreign, domestic, and consolidation.
Andrew, if I were running a clinic at the moment, or I owned a kind of small group of clinics, is now a good time to be looking for an investor or a sale?
So it really comes down to the specifics of
And what would I
Before-
need to attract them, let's say?
Certainly. So
What would make me attractive to an investor or a purchaser?
I think the sustainable performance with track record is important. I'd say visible runway of both organic growth as well as inorganic growth, with clear defined KPIs, both from a patient standpoint as well as from an operating standpoint. And ultimately, revenue growth is going to be a key determinant factor, but sustained attractive profitability is always going to attract a premium valuation. So I'd say performance with credible but ambitious outlook. It's a very good time. I think that the one consideration is there are quite a few assets coming to market, so you would need to think about is there another business of a similar profile coming to market, and would you want to run in parallel? If not, can you get ahead, or is it better to go in sequence?
Okay, Ying, you have kind of overlap both the kind of private sector and the kind of public sector in your professorship role. Can I ask you about your view on kind of public funding in this country, government funding for IVF? We know there's a bit of a postcode lottery. COVID is dominating the NHS. What's that going to mean for what's your view of what that will mean for NHS funding of IVF treatment?
Thank you, Keith. I mean, I think, it's unlikely that NHS will fund more IVF treatment. Now, in my opinion, the funding may diminish. It may, right? It depends on the overall allocation of budgets to different areas in public health, in health service. From our experience, because clearly we're a private clinic, but we do hold, like many IVF centers in UK, public contracts.
Yeah.
We have seen, and that I have to say it's from our center's perspective, I can't speak for other centers, we've seen a really upsurge in the demand, particularly in private side. Having said that, we have been very proactive in the COVID period throughout, in terms of communicating with our patients. As you saw, we are also very particular with emotional signature tracking. We want to understand how our patients are feeling and how do we support them. I mean, we're not perfect, but we do really strive to do that. And so we have seen after the clinic reopened a big surge in the demand from a private side. And of course, NHS patients would come through as they would come through normally, but certainly on the private side, there's a big surge. NHS funding, I'm not confident that it would be maintained. I do fear that we may be facing potentially a downward trend in, which has been for a while now in the UK.
Yeah. On the other side of that, so let's assume that demand is certainly not going to decline. We're hopeful there's going to be an increase in demand for IVF. The other issue that has impacted our health services has been staffing. Certainly, let's talk about the UK. Can you get the staff? Are you in a lot of health services? We just can't get enough people to deliver to the demand that we're facing at the moment. Is that true within the IVF sector, within IVF clinics generally?
My general feeling is it's certainly impacting on the public sector much more than the private sector. But sure, yes. I think it's across the board. And I certainly know that in the public sector where demand increased after the lockdown, there was a difficulty or a challenge in reinstating the service at the pace that would have coped with the demand due to redeployment, due to absences, due to various different reasons. And so I think the public sector is still seeing and facing a huge challenge in trying to restart the NHS machinery to restart the services. Whereas the private sector now, because we are much more responsive, it certainly gives us the advantage to maneuver much quicker, certainly in our circumstances anyway, that we we were able to recommence the services. We never stopped anyway, even during the lockdown. Sure. We continued with remote consultations, but we were certainly much more responsive, and therefore I think we have gained market share overall.
Okay, Inga, just give us a view kind of about IVF in Spain and the health services in Spain in terms of staffing those services. Historically, the UK, prior to Brexit, effectively stole a lot of staff from Spain to staff our NHS and private hospitals. The last time I went to a private hospital, several of my staff were from Spain and Portugal. Are they coming back? Have you got issues in terms of kind of meeting the demand and providing the staff that's needed?
I think it's still very, despite Brexit, I think it's still very attractive for Spanish medical staff to work a few years in the UK. And actually, we had one of our, to give you an example, we had one of our embryologists who actually just left to a clinic in Southampton. So I don't think that Brexit stopped that.
Gone to Ying Chong's hospital.
And it is true that they also would like to come back after several years, which for us is fine. I believe actually it's good to change jobs and to work in different lab, even in different countries. Is it difficult for us to get good staff? I think there will be a battle on talent. I think it's very complicated to have international, in our case, because we're an international clinic. Over 60% is from abroad. So it's very, for us, it's complicated to find international doctors, embryologists, or nurses. But in general, if you look at the public sector, it's not complicated to find good staff.
Okay, and just to follow up, we've got a session on fertility travel later on.
Okay.
You've obviously got a big throughput of international patients coming into Spain.
Yes.
And now those numbers have recovered. People are traveling for IVF.
Yes, exactly. I do have to say that prior to COVID, the first semester of 2020, the vast majority of our international patients were actually from the UK. That's almost zero right now.
Right.
But because of new strategies reaching out to patients in different countries, we have patients from Italy, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. That's actually where our growth comes from.
So you had to respond very quickly to change your international strategy.
Exactly.
UK closes down. Where else are we going to get our international patients?
Exactly. From? Yeah, of course. There's obviously a direct correlations between mobility restrictions and patient inflow. But okay, there's so many countries and with different legislations. So I think we were very quickly with the whole team. We have a great team. We were able to attract patients from other countries. Which is also good because now it's also interesting for us for marketing department, and I think it's a nice goal as well, that we have to reassure, and that's why I spoke about that we travel actually to the UK, reassure patients that is safe enough. There's a lot of mistrust, also misconcept on traveling abroad, and especially actually the only country I can say right now is actually UK that's actually sort of lagging behind in traveling abroad. And I traveled just a few weeks to London. And it was absolutely safe and easy to travel, and I'm like, okay, everybody can do it. So that's why our communication is more about it's safe to travel, no obstacles, and if so, we are here to help you. Testing it if necessary, we can do it also at the clinic, etc., etc. But there's still a lot of fear, let's say so, on traveling. But there's actually many UK patients,
Okay. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. I'm just going to ask a question about, I'm going to start with Katya on this one, we'll go around the group. And it's about the kind of social changes that the pandemic has driven in terms of the way we live, the way we work, the way we think about life, and how that may have changed demand for IVF, the perception of infertile couples? Are we going to have more kids, less kids? Katja, what do you think?
Yeah, I was actually, if you give me 20 seconds, we're also going to make one other point on staff, Keith. Sorry to
sure.
the flow. I think it kind of ties with your question to Andrew earlier about, you know, who should the investors be interested in, and, you know, who are we paying multiples for? The importance of platform, right, rather than just being an assembly of clinics, a network of clinics, versus being a proper corporate platform which is well connected, is becoming increasingly important and understood by clinicians, and on occasion even by patients, actually. But I think things such as being able to train your own embryologists, because you have the scale to do that, being able to move your clinicians across countries, potentially giving them a career trajectory, you know, things like that. Corporates are a little bit better equipped to do that at larger scale. So that's an interesting theme as well to just check in there. But in terms of social preferences, it's actually an interesting one. I genuinely have looked and haven't found so far any data on that front. So it might be something we should survey and then report back to you guys on. Because I think there is definitely some chatter around family becoming more important and family becoming more kind of viable in a way. You know, you can now imagine having children or having an extra child where you previously were struggling to fit it into your busy working life, etc. Maybe. On the other hand, people who have gone through homeschooling with children and are slightly traumatized.
Never again.
I don't know if it's, you know, some of it is pulling back, but I have looked at birth rates and birth stats, but it's only been so long, right? So there doesn't seem to have been an impact from the early lockdown in terms of birth rates, but whether there is going to be an impact from 2 years of COVID changing kind of social preferences and rates of having children, etc. It's a bit too early to tell. And if others have seen any data on that front, I would be fascinated.
Andrew, is the puppy boom going to be replaced by a baby boom? Very briefly.
Yeah, I know we spoke about this yesterday. You could draw an analogy. I think there are two trends, and I'll remove emotion from it for a second. But I think we saw an immediate knee-jerk reaction to get gratification with puppies. I think you could draw an analogy to say people are more comfortable and people want to prioritize the personal side of life and just get on with it. Equally, at the same time, there are pressures in lockdown, and there is data on increasing divorce rates. So clearly, that would be a counterbalance to that argument. But maybe one trend which I do find interesting is, which I think was happening anyway pre-COVID, but being accelerated by COVID, is the level of corporate sponsorship or benefits for fertility, which was a big theme in the US and has really accelerated in the UK and across Europe. There are a number of firms that are offering between £5,000 and £30,000 fertility packages, to be tapped across your career, which I think is a very large positive, which then also counterbalances the point that Ying made about the NHS reducing funding.
Okay, thank you. Ying, Inga, very quickly, 1 minute, anything further to add on social change and how it's changed people's thinking about fertility?
Keith, I think from the ground, certainly patients do reflect much more, I feel, on their family. The pause and the time has allowed people with no children to reflect on life in general. So I think people do look much more into, how do I start my family? Should I start them now? If there was a problem, I should be seeking care sooner rather than later. And that's a really positive step, I think.
Okay. And Inga, you get the last word.
Yes, I totally agree with Ying and Katja and Andrew. I mean, family values really have changed. Instead, what's now really important in life? Is it your car? Is it your house? Or the travel that you're doing? Or is it like the family, what you want, your legacy, what you also want to give to life? So definitely has changed. And if I speak a lot with patients, and you really see that they really have reflected about it. And so family values,
Thank you, Inga. I'm going to close that panel session now. Many thanks to our panelists and their contribution this morning. It's been excellent. Please stick around for our next panel session, which is going to start in 20 minutes time at 10:10 UK time, where we'll be talking about future trends in fertility treatment. So please, thank you, panelists. Stick around and hear what some of your other colleagues have to say in the next sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all.